Good evening, Upper Darby. Welcome to the September 27, 2022 Education and Pupil Services Committee in-person and virtual meeting. Before we call tonight's meeting to order, Dr. McGarry, would you please outline the public participation procedure, sir?
Yes, good evening, everybody. The Upper Darby Board of School Directors allows participation at committee meetings, both virtually and in person. We call on those who are in person to provide comments or questions to the board, and the board will then provide those questions to the administration if the board feels they can answer them themselves. Tonight is a committee meeting. There are two committee meetings. There is a Education and Pupil Services and a Finance and Operations. We allow questions on any of the agenda items on that report. So if there are people in person here tonight, after a review of all the agenda items and when the board has finished their discussion and they open it up to public comment, we ask that those who are in person come to the microphone, provide their name, address, and the specific agenda item they would like to question or comment on this evening. We also will take either phone or email comments. Tonight is committee meeting, so committee meeting questions at upperdarbysd.org. Please provide your name, address, and the specific agenda item you would like to comment on or question this evening, and we'll read that and take that into consideration before we move forward. You can also phone a comment in at 610-789-7200, extension 2000. Again, the board will take that into consideration before moving forward for any agenda items after each conversation takes place. Happy to remind everybody again how that happens throughout the night.
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Please do that at your discretion. The meeting of the Education and Pupil Services Committee will please come to order. Roll call, Board Secretary, Mr. Rogers, please.
Dr. Haig.
Present.
Mr. Desnoyers.
Present.
Mr. Neal. Mr. Warsavage. Ms. Lamar Murphy. Mrs. Williams.
Present.
Mrs. Mitchell.
Present.
Mr. Fields.
I am present and can hear the proceedings.
Mr. Brown.
Present. Thank you. The district posted this evening's agenda to board docs at least 24 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting. Is there a motion to approve that previously posted agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any amendments to offer?
There are no amendments tonight.
Okay, thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying I oppose and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carried. I will now turn over the Education and Pupil Services Committee agenda to co-chair Mrs. Director Williams.
Thank you. Mr. Marshall-elect, please begin with an overview of your agenda items for this evening.
Okay, thank you. So tonight we have one agenda item, which is informational. It's a school safety and security update. Dr. McGarry, Mr. Manley, and myself will go through some emergency preparedness the district has in place, some other resources we put in place in our school district as well. So with your permission, we'll start.
Please, thank you.
All right, so we'll kick it over to Dr. McGarry, who's going to kick off the presentation this evening. Dr. McGarry, it's all yours.
Thanks. Each year, as per our board policy, we review annually our emergency preparedness language and drills and how we conduct it. Under the school code in Pennsylvania, school districts are required to not only conduct fire drills and bus evacuation drills, but most recently there's been a requirement to conduct emergency active shooter training drills within the first 90 days of school. We train all of our staff, all of our teachers, all of our administrators. Our school board is familiar with the language. And each year we want to make sure that the public understands our communication, the language that we use so that we're prepared in the event that, God forbid, emergency should take place. So this evening, our agenda, we will cover our emergency response language, procedures, how we communicate. The team is a whole team effort with the Director of Communications, and we have an online process that we follow as well as an in-person process that we follow to communicate wherever we are. The proactive efforts that we have in place, not only how we respond to things, but the preventative measures we try to have in the school district and our mental health supports. We're going to talk about threat assessments, which is a newer requirement in Pennsylvania to conduct threat assessments with students in the event that any kind of emergency or threat takes place. Title IX investigations have changed substantially. over the last couple of years, and it relates to safety, security, bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, how we conduct ourselves in that area. And then just some topics that we're not going to ask the board to decide on this evening, but I do want the board to know that we've been reviewing and looking into areas that we could consider to try to make our schools as safe as we possibly can. So there'll be some future considerations that we'll be bringing to the board this evening, and then we'll circle back before we make any decisions on updates on those topics. I'll turn it over to our head of public safety and security, Mr. Mark Manley. We're fortunate to have a former Upper Darby Township captain who is now working in the school district. He has spent time working in safety and security here in the school district at the high school, working with our security department before transitioning over to the central registration department, where he also worked on registering students in the school district, but also verifying residency for a number of years. And then we moved him back into safety and security most recently when Mr. Gentile decided to retire. Mark?
Thank you, Dr. McGarry. Good evening, everybody. We're going to start out with our 4 basic responses to the Emergency Preparedness Plan. Number 1, the least restrictive of which is the lockout. The lockout implies that the disturbance, the situation which causes the alarm, is outside of the school building. The first response from staff should be to bring any students involved in a gym class, horticulture, art, anything like that. They would be immediately brought back into the building. Once inside the building, the classes, the normal day-to-day operation of the school is the same. Classes can change, lunches can occur, but the exterior of the building is under extra watch by administrators, security, and police if they're there. They're not required to be there for this situation. It's entirely up to the principal. Updates will be provided to the staff through our communication platform, Crisis Go. The dismissal time could possibly be delayed if the principal is not happy that the situation has been made safe. And it is entirely up to the principal, these situations. They are initiated by the principal, and they are declared clear by the principal. As the principal gains more information, they may institute an escalation. They can go from a lockout to a lock-in, or a lock-in to a lockdown, as we'll go further along here. Just a couple examples that we had in the past year. There was a burglary that occurred at Bishop Hill Apartments. Primus went into a lockout while police were searching the area for the burglar. The infamous bear situation we had at Charles Kelly, which could have disrupted the entire day, but because of the great response that we got from the staff and, thank goodness, the police in that situation, the regular school day was able to take place. And then a much more serious situation over at Bywood Elementary, where there was a shooting approximately a block away, and that occurred during a recess period. And the staff did a tremendous job of getting the kids back into the building. And Principal Meehan over there had taken her own initiative and had the building already secured before police even got to her with that information. So that was a tremendous job. Our middle response is the lock-in, which is a situation that's been declared because the situation is inside of the school building. The initial response for the staff is to have everyone secure themselves in the classrooms or offices. We ask the staff anywhere near a bathroom or perhaps a cafeteria to do a quick sweep of the area and bring any students in, whether they belong to that teacher or not. They're safely brought in the room and they can be accounted for through our communication platform. Again, once the classroom is secured, the normal class activity can continue. but there is no one in the halls, no one in the common areas. Again, updates can be provided through the communications platform, and there could be a delay in class change or dismissal or lunch periods. Again, this could be a situation where an irate person has gained entry into the school, or even perhaps a medical emergency where they want to keep the common areas clear so the staff or students are not exposed to whatever's causing the problem. And again, this is initiated and cleared strictly by the principal with the information that they have. Police may be involved, however, they're not required, and this situation could also escalate to the lockdown. And our most restrictive and most serious of the emergency responses is the lockdown, which occurs strictly when there is an impending threat to human life. We've all experienced hearing the active shooter situation, not necessarily just within the building itself, but it could be just outside the building or even an adjacent property to the school. Again, where any place where the situation is a imminent threat to the life of staff or students. The active shooter situation generates its own three types of response. Initially, again, if we have people outside of the building, when the lockdown is declared, those individuals are instructed to attempt to determine where the threat is coming from and to quickly and safely as possible run the opposite direction and continue to run until they feel as though they have found a safe area. The second situation, and this is where we do our drills in the schools themselves, is the hide response. And each year we train with every school, every classroom, for them to find the safe area within that room where they are least likely to be observed by the threat, and they are to remain out of sight, cover their windows, turn out lights, and attempt to remain as quiet as possible. The last situation is the nightmare situation, the fight response. And this is where the threat has gained entry to the room where the staff or students are and requires that they actually physically engage with the attacker in an attempt to save their own lives. Our fourth response in the emergency preparedness plan is the evacuation. And these are what is commonly known to everybody who's done them hundreds or dozens of times, are the fire drills. And this is also gone over with the staff of each and every school, where they are to know their route from the classroom to their rally point on the outside of the building, and then also know the off-site rally point if that becomes necessary. The staff is required to take attendance, and also the Crisis Go app is used in an attempt to account for all of the students and staff, as well as communicate conditions. The Delaware County Police Alert to School Safety System, otherwise known as the DelPass, is a communication device that's located in the main office of every school building. And what it is a system that is activated, again, strictly in a life-threatening situation. And once activated, it results in a direct line of communication to the 911 center in Lima. At the 911 center, they have the ability to actually hear what's going on within that office environment. And although they cannot speak to anyone in the office, they relay what they hear to the first responders. who be on their way to that school.
Just to add to that too, those of us who are in the position, my position's Mark's position, superintendents or safety, if there's a Dell pass hit in a local district, we receive that alert as well. So communication, I think, is vital. We've tried to do the best that we can as far as timeliness of communication is concerned. I would say several years ago, students and social media was faster than the school district, and we've definitely changed our approach going back the last, I would say, 6 or 7 years. We have an entire incident command center. Central administration goes into either my office when we had an office, or now we set up a Google Meet where everybody has a responsibility and a backup to communicate with the board, to communicate with the administration where it's happening, to communicate with the police, and to communicate with the public. We've expanded our communication. I think part of the frustration sometimes people have is that, you know, who communicates what information and the timeliness of it. As we go through this presentation, remember, if there is an incident, God forbid, and a crime has taken place, we have to acquiesce to local law enforcement. And we have to make sure that I review with the chief of police and with Aranda, our director of communications. We have to be very clear and concise in our communication and making sure that per our MOU, our Memo of Understanding, that's a requirement of the state and the Commonwealth, to have an MOU wherever there are schools in communities with the local law enforcement in place, that we have a direct communication with each other and that we share and agree on communication. In the event where a crime has taken place, the law enforcement takes over and they take over the communication, and we will take a somewhat of a back seat to their communication and handling it if there is a crime that's there. Nonetheless, we work hand in glove. We actually had a meeting with fire and police today over some process and procedures that we have here in the school district, and we work very well in trying to work on our communications, even over holidays and when school's not in session together. We also communicate through our parent link system via email and phone calls to our schools. Sometimes it's localized just to that school community. When it's a whole district-wide impact, we communicate to the entire community. We also, over the last 2 to 3 years, have implemented what is called Crisis Go, which is an app that parents can download, board members can download. We've involved our police. Police have Crisis Go here as well. That has twofold communication. It allows us to communicate with parents through the app, parents who have signed on to Crisis Go. It allows staff to send alerts and communicate through that app as well, and we were able to communicate with each other. There's an administrative back channel that we can communicate on that app. That's been a positive communication tool here in the school district as well. We also have social media. We have our Facebook, our Twitter, and how we communicate, follow up, timeliness of that, and then obviously the district website. One of the key points of pride for us is that we have as timely and frequent communication as we possibly can during, and then we want to make sure that we follow up with an aftermath of what occurred, being as honest and open with our community as we possibly can, explaining exactly what occurred. Being transparent with our community is something that we've learned from in the past, that there were concerns about what's fact or fiction. So we take a lot of pride in a follow-up. After each one of these incidents, we also have ARs and policy procedures that we follow internally. We debrief. How can we do it better? We often debrief with the police. How is our communication? What can we do to improve? And that allows us to feed our communication. Aron, anything you want to add to that at all?
Now, I just want to say that it's a whole team effort. You know, there's no one person that communications, will lie on. When I do my trainings across the district on building a reputation of customer service and value, I do that with the security guards, with the lunch aides, with anyone, secretaries, everyone who comes into contact with the community. We make it very clear that is not the job of the superintendent. It's not just the job of the director of communications. It's not just the job of the school board to maintain that reputation of honest, open communication. All of us are responsible for it. So I just want to say it's a team effort. The parents are very supportive in not coming up to the schools any longer when there's an incident. It just allows us, the police and our team, to effectively manage the situation, get the kids back to education, because that is what schools are for, not to manage incidents all day. We want kids to be back in class. So through Dr. McGarry's leadership, we've been able to streamline that process. to be consistent about it and to continue to improve it. So I just want to thank the community for their support.
Yeah, and part of that communication, it goes all the way down to Aramark food service, transportation. You have to worry about getting buses ready, food, depending on where you are in the middle of the day. It's a monster operation here in the school district, given the size and the complexity to pull this off. So everybody has a role to play, and there are backups to the backups in the event that somebody is out. We all have been trained internally, and we all have a role to play communication-wise here in the school district. Ed?
So we have a number of, excuse me, we have a number of interventions and support service and structures in place here in the district, excuse me, that are very well established and have been in place for a number of years, and one of which is also a form of communication, is the Safe to Say Something process we have in place. I would say about 4 or 5 years ago, this came out as a requirement for the state of Pennsylvania, where it's an anonymous or can not be anonymous tip line for school districts and law enforcement agencies to have students, parents, community members, thank you, Rhonda, provide tips about any type of threat, suicidal ideation, any type of life harm that may be occurring inside or outside of school and at all hours of the day. So generally speaking, most threats do come in between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. And there's a few of us who are on call in the district who get a text and a phone call and an email when a threat does come in. And then one of us will either speak to the principal and have them investigate and try to rectify the issue. Life safety threats do come in at 24 hours a day. And thankfully, Mr. Manley's on call 24 hours a day, so he takes them generally most of the time. But if he's not unavailable, it goes down the chain. I think I'm next in line after that. But then we'll end up communicating with law enforcement at that time, who take the lead at that point in time if it's a life safety issue. So, like I said, suicide ideation, homicidal ideation, bomb threats, things like that come in at all hours of the day. We will be putting out another reminder to our families and our staff and our community very soon about how to use this tool, how to make a threat, or how to make a report, about a threat, and how to use this established program. But it has been very useful for us. When it first came out, we were getting tips probably 4 or 5 times a day. That we were some are also fraudulent. Some come in, it could be from Georgia. And we did that through this, which does take time. But we do have backup with our law enforcement. There's a central command that Safe to Say has in place in Harrisburg that does filter down all the threats down to the schools and the local law enforcement agencies. So the next structure we have in place is PBIS. And again, this is something you all have seen over a number of years. A number of years about we've been celebrating with our staff and our students here in our school district about the supports that we do in interventions, positive interventions when students are learning the rules of school. But again, I won't read every word for word up there, but this also complements our K-12 social and emotional curriculum we've put in place 2 years now. And these work hand in hand during a dedicated time of our school day to teach students expected behaviors, how to recognize their own self and be self-aware, and then also reinforce those positive or expected behaviors throughout the day. And all of our teachers and students are well aware of this, and again, it's a very highly regarded district-wide program we have here in Upper Darby. Next of which is, I wouldn't say it's newer, but it is somewhat new within the past 3-4 years, is a trauma-informed approach. We have I think come to the place in our district we have all of our schools are trauma-informed schools. Through our partnership with Lakeside Neurologic over the past couple of years, we've been really embracing the brain-based approach to supporting students as a tier 1 basic level support within our school district. We have a number of neurologic specialists, or coaches if we call them, who work directly with our teachers each and every day on how to recognize trauma in their students and how to respond when a student might be misbehaving or might be exhibiting either physical aggression or verbal aggression, and recognizing where that's coming from and how to respond appropriately so it doesn't escalate the matter further, but rather try to de-escalate the student and have the student get back to a safe place where then he or she can then process through the situation and then learn from what happened and move on. But right now we have in place this school year is a classroom regulation plan for all of our classrooms, which took a number of years of work with our team, Dr. Manfrey, Ms. Kelly, Ms. Simone, Josh McNeil from Lakeside, Mr. Solano when he was here. We also have a school-wide regulation plan. So now a menu of options for our schools to pick. So for example, if students come into in the morning routine, could be hearing music playing in the background in a way as a way for the brain to kind of regulate and get ready for the school day. When we visited Lakeside School out in Montgomery County, one of the first things we saw when we got there was students playing basketball first thing in the morning. They were playing table tennis. They were either listening to music. They're doing something active to keep their brain focused and regulate coming off the bus, coming out of maybe their home that might have been dysfunctional, and coming to a place to get to a safe place mentally to then be prepared for the school day. So we're taking that approach here in our schools, and it's been working very well. And so much so we've had a trauma-informed leadership team, or TILT we call them, in each one of our schools. Again, being coached by the neurologic specialist on how to do these individual pieces of work in our schools. And the hope is, one day we're going to be self-trained and then turn around ourselves and carry on this initiative in our school district. But again, it's a lot of work and a lot of really good things happening here for the support service. And again, to complement that, we have a long-term partnership with Child Guidance Resource Center, CGRC. And started with our emotional support program, way back when, providing the behavior specialists and mental health support for our students in the emotional support program who have an IEP. Since that time, we've broadened our relationship with CGRC to provide outpatient clinics right here in our schools. We don't necessarily run those clinics. They're still run by CGRC, but it provides the community a much closer visit to their mental health supports rather than going out to Havertown or another location. They can still go through the process to get recommended and evaluated by CGRC using their own insurance, but then they can come to on-site one of our schools to get that help during the school day rather than driving somewhere else. Or if it's a barrier to getting out to Havertown, they can walk to one of our schools here. Last year, we started expanding even more so with our, ARP ESSER money to expand our mental health supports, our school-based mental health supports in our schools, to have 20 mental health clinicians on site to support students through the COVID-19 pandemic. We still have a few people we're hiring at some of our schools, but generally every one of our schools has at least one person here to help with the overflow that our social workers and counselors are trying to keep up with students who might be hurting still from the COVID-19 pandemic, but also just generally from other mental health issues they might be facing in schools that might be manifesting in the classroom or in other learning environments. But again, they're a wonderful group, just like Lakeside, and we've had a lot of success with both of those groups. Student assistance program, again, another thing we've had in place that we're required to have in place through Holcomb Behavioral Health. We've utilized this extensively with students and families who might need extra help but don't know how to get it. Whether it's drug and alcohol counseling, whether it's mental health support, whether it's grief counseling, whatever it might be. Marilyn West Nolte, who's our point of contact here in the district, who's wonderful, who's been here for a long time, helps coordinate those assessments and gets parents the help that they need to then access outside services that will then complement what we do inside the school. And again, that collaboration, that connection between our in-school mental health specialists, our social workers, counselors, can then complement and collaborate with the outside service to then bridge that gap when students are what they're learning at home and what they're learning in school as well. Speak Up, and again, I won't read it word for word. You've heard Speak Up, a number of different times in other presentations. But again, it's a way for our students to come together through facilitators and talk about issues that are relevant to them, where it's a safe place, again, to come into their schools and be led by highly trained professionals who we have a very good relationship with, and talk about what's important to them and what are barriers to them, to the students coming into schools, and what's making them, might be having a hard day. What is it? How can we get it out there? And also difficult conversations. If they're uncomfortable to have those conversations at home or with their friends, it can be facilitated through this process and be a form of release for those students. But again, another example of another initiative we have in here that has really taken off and helped our students and our staff very well. As Dr. McGarry mentioned, threat assessments is relatively new. It's not new across the United States. It's new for Pennsylvania as of last school year. But again, I won't read everything to you, but we had to have a board policy that is required. Every member of our school threat assessment teams, which include an administrator, social worker, counselor, psychologist, special ed professional, a nurse, they're all trained, and we use our IU, Dr. Terry Urbacher, who's very, very well known in the state of Pennsylvania for training in this model to train all of our threat assessment members in this process. We've adopted Dr. Cornell. If you want to look him up and look at his background, he's one of the key members who developed threat assessments, which started in Virginia for him as a result of the Virginia Tech situation. We call it the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines. So we've adopted that process here in the district. What happens is that every time there is any type of threat, whether we think it's a joke or not, there's a formal process that we sit down with the team and meet with the student, the family, the identified victim, any relevant witnesses. We do a record review. We go back and look at any mental health records that we have in place. We talk to parents who might have relevant information. And then we make a decision whether that threat is either transient or if it's a real threat. And then we treat it appropriately. Last school year alone, we had 210 threat assessments completed here in the district. And that's a lot. And we'll tell you who's going through this process. It takes a lot of time to do it the right way, but it is very important because oftentimes we're finding a lot of the threats that we're hearing, when you sit down and talk to the people involved, sometimes they're not as bad as what they sound like. Sometimes they are, and we have to do something about it, whether it's intervening with discipline, but also intervening with mental health supports, which kind of go hand in hand when threats do become real.
I just want to say that tremendous amount of work goes to the building principals. Thankfully, this board supported adding assistant principals to our own elementary schools. But when you add threat assessments on top of, we're really here to do education, reading, writing, arithmetic. It's expanded over the last several years of what the responsibilities are of an educator. It's become very, very comprehensive. Schools have been the place to try to solve a lot of society's concerns. These take hours and hours of time, and I will tell you that they also take place over the weekends. So safe to say is 24/7. I can tell you there hasn't been a holiday, whether it's been Christmas morning, winter break, where there hasn't been, we have not been on the phone together, unfortunately, dealing with some of these circumstances here in the district. So I do want to give a compliment and say thank you to Ed and his team, what they've done, and the principals in the school district who do an unbelievable job being available here in Upper Darby. That's just 210 of those types of assessments that we've done, not to mention all the other investigative work that takes place. And compliments to our kids and our parents. Parents are not shy about contacting us, and students aren't shy about alerting us to some of the concerns. So compliments to the kids in this community and their parents for speaking up and letting us know what's going on. But it's a tremendous amount of work that goes into meeting this policy here in the school district.
And for anyone out there watching tonight, too, students or families, this is posted on our district website in terms of how to make report a threat, either to your school district officials or through to Safe to Say something as well. But again, it's on our district website, so you have that access if you need it tonight or moving forward. The very last piece, which I'll go through again, is another structure we have in place, which is relatively new, our Title IX investigations, which thankfully I passed off to Ms. Simpson this school year. They'll take the brunt of these. This was a fun year last year doing these. But again, Board Policy 103 and 104, which govern non-discrimination practices against students, and students is 103, staff is 104. Anyone that receives federal funding has to have that in place to address Title IX, which again is discrimination for any purposes of any sex or origin or anything like that. All complaints that come across a principal or a counselor or a social worker's desk that might be even a glimpse of a sexual in nature get referred up to the Title IX coordinator to then review, and now Ms. Simpson does it, and I've been helping her with the transition this school year. But we would apply or review that complaint along with the definition under our board policy. If we believe it meets the definition, then we go through the process of meeting with the family, providing supportive measures, which could be anything from removal of the student from the classroom, changing a schedule, providing counseling, providing services. In some cases, moving a student, the alleged offender, who we call the respondent under Title IX regulations, to another learning environment temporarily until the investigation is complete. But after that point, we go through and we talk with the parents and the student about what this process entails. It's not as simple and as quick as maybe it used to be, a number of years ago before they redesigned this law, but it could take upwards of almost 2 months before a complaint is formally investigated, reviewed by both parties, and then a written determination by a decision maker who's not the coordinator, not Dr. McGarry, not anyone in our school district, has to review the information and all the evidence, every piece of evidence collected during this investigation, text messages, emails, witness statements are reviewed and then redacted, and a decision is made based upon whether that act or that threat or whatever report was a violation of our district policy and Title IX. And again, the violation has to then also not only meet the criteria of the definition, but also impact the student's ability to access school here in the district. But again, it can, if parents choose to make the formal complaint and go through the process, that's what it would take. Oftentimes, if they choose not to, they might be satisfied with the supportive measures, but also we still address the behavior no matter what. We don't let it go because it's not a Title IX violation. Oftentimes, what we found is just about every single issue that comes across as a report also violates a code of conduct for a number of other issues. So although it may not be Title IX, it could be something else, which we would then discipline the student for no matter what. We don't have to wait for the investigation for that to happen, so we'd still address the behavior no matter what. Police involvement often happens too, and if that does happen, we take a step back, let them do their thing, and they report to us when they've closed the case or they've moved on, and then we then intervene. But all the while, we're keeping in touch as the coordinators, Ms. Simpson now, keeping in touch with the family, providing supportive measures, and making sure that they're okay during this process, because again, both parties are key in supporting them during the investigation. But just last school year, it may seem like a small number, 32 reports with 3 formal complaints. But I can tell you from experience, that was a lot of work going through and doing that. I mean, hours and hours and hours of work just for one complaint, waiting for feedback, waiting for parents to get back. I mean, it's a pretty extensive process to do it the right way. But it's another form of support we have for our students here in the district when there are very serious complaints that do come through to our schools.
And in closing, tomorrow night I'll be on a panel representing the district. Representative Curry has put together equity and mental health in the community, and there'll be mental health experts on that panel, and I'll be speaking on behalf of the school district, communicating with the public about what's going on. And as a school community, as a school district, we need to really consider how do we go about keeping our schools safe. I hope you saw in tonight's presentation, there's obviously a need to respond and react, unfortunately, to situations when trauma or an emergency response is warranted. These are very serious situations that we take place. We are aware of the fact that every time a lock-in, a lockout, a lockdown has occurred, it's traumatic for kids, and we don't want to become numb to that. If you read the Uvalde School District report that came out, one of the key parts that we talked about as an administration when we read that report from Uvalde was lockdown fatigue, and that those school districts were upwards of over 50 lockdowns in a 2-month period of time, and how that may have, in some of the reports, slowed some of the response time. I guess that's open for debate in that community. But here in the school district, we moved to the lock-in and lockout so that not every single time a lockdown is called, whereas a few years ago, lockdown was one of the first responses. So we're trying to make sure that kids can have as much of a normal learning environment as possible given the circumstances that we face. With that said, thanks to this board, and obviously we've made good use of the additional funding regarding ARP and ESSER, American Rescue Plan, and elementary and secondary emergency response funding. Unfortunately, as we know as a school community, that funding is going to go away. So we've added all these resources, and that's always kind of the Achilles heel. You put these resources in place, and unfortunately, when you're relying on human resources and that funding is cut, how do you maintain that? I'll be talking about that tomorrow night on that forum. So we want to talk about, how do we add more additional mental health services to the school in the district? And there's a lack of highly trained professionals out there right now because so many school districts and so many communities are in need of social services and pupil services and related services in their communities. So we're going to talk about, what path do we go down next and what do we look at? We're going to talk about armed security. This topic came up in the past. Obviously, we're not looking for the board to make decisions on this right now, but I've been meeting with staff throughout the school district, asking them things about why they would leave the school district, why would they remain, safety, security, and a lot of these conversations come up about an armed security presence, weapon detection system. We went this summer and we visited local school districts who have implemented a weapon detection system, which is a new technology that's out there that is not like a metal detector. It's what you would go through if you go to a professional game or you go through the airport. We're considering, do we want to bring in some form of weapons detection at first to extracurricular activities like sporting events, to have students come through and make sure that things are safe before we go all out to every single school having it. We took teachers from the high school. Mrs. Simone, who's here tonight, put an action research group together last year at the high school, which was based on recruiting and retaining staff at the high school. And that group came together and talked about some of the concerns they have, and one of them being safety and security. I can tell you in that meeting, when we went to visit things like weapon detection system or armed security, there were some staff who were adamant that they don't want to leave Upper Darby, but if we don't explore some of these resources here in the school district, it might be a reason why they leave. That there is a real fear in schools on a daily basis about, can we keep kids and staff as safe as possible? And then another process that was out there, I know Mr. Berman, I think, dealt with this most recently in a neighboring school district, which is the electronic hall pass conversation. But we think it's a good idea. We're going to explore the idea of, not having certain kids out in the hallway at the same time if they've had an exchange, if there's a Title IX investigation or a threat assessment, really using technology to make sure that all the building knows if a student's out in the hallway on a pass or not in a pass. So we're trying to really review every type of process that we can in place. Obviously, we all agree that the greatest resource is humans, having more trained, highly trained individuals in front of kids. Unfortunately, there are a lack of those professionals out there right now in the community. Obviously, school discipline is something that's a real issue in the school district. We have students that are suspended and expelled, and that really doesn't always change the behavior, despite what people think. It's a last resource and a last resort, but we do use it, and unfortunately, those kids have a right to be restored and to move forward. We do want to talk about these topics moving forward with teachers and with the board, and we will bring forward recommendations for discussion. Obviously, there'll be public discussion before we make any decision. We have met with a company who's working with local school districts on weapon detection system. We would like to bring them into a public meeting so the board could ask questions and review that and work our way through some of those steps. But we wanted to let you know and the public know there are so many opportunities here in the school district for us to come together to really say we're doing as much as we can. It's impossible to say you're doing everything, and it's dangerous to say you've done everything possible. We're trying to think outside the box and do as much as we can to create as normal a learning experience for our kids, but also recognize the fact that society today and what makes it into our schools today is a real factor that interrupts teaching and learning. We want to make sure we keep it as safe and as normal a learning process for kids as possible. So that's our presentation for tonight, and we'll open it up to any questions or concerns the board has or the public has.
I just had one request at the beginning of the lock-in, lock-out stuff. You mentioned several times that the police was not required, and I think if the community looks at this presentation 6 months from now, they're not going to remember which ones where the police isn't required. If you could just add that to the lock-in and lock-out slides as a bullet maybe, or somewhere on the slide.
Certainly.
Just as a piece of information.
Absolutely.
And the other, I think my other question was about, for Ed, about the, for Mr. Marshallak, for the 20 mental health clinicians in our district. I was excited to hear that, and I know you said we use ESSER money for that, and it really alludes to Dr. McGarry's statement about sustainability, so I'm concerned about that going away. I love the fact that we have that, and I think it's needed even beyond COVID, so I'm just concerned about that going away. Are we going to be able to keep them?
So that came up in a lot of our conversations about the sustainability of using this ARP-ESSER money, and we did view this as, for lack of better terms, like a shot in the arm, if you will. Look, we know that the students are hurting as a result of COVID-19, but there might be more of a fallout as a result of coming back to school after a pandemic and being in virtual learning. That we put the more supports in place now, they may not need it over time.
Okay.
But of course, through our budget process and we evaluate to see we need more people, we'll always come back and try to find a way to get more people in our district. It might not be 20 people,
Right.
but we believe that putting this in place now will address the COVID-19 issues, and then over time, we may not need them.
So you'll scale it down as needed as you evaluate it.
Correct, but
Okay.
without a doubt, without more funding, we will not be able to sustain 20 people moving forward.
Okay. Any other, just one other really just comment. The trauma-informed care with Lakeside, I'm happy that we have that. I mean, and I love the fact that we've had it before it became, nice to have it. It became popular in all of the districts, and we've had it for years. So I'm happy about that. I think that's it for me. Thanks. Thank you.
So, sort of my comment sort of piggybacks on what Ed was saying, but I'm just really glad, first of all, that we're talking about safety and security in sort of a more holistic way, right? That I'm not sure that other schools in their safety and security presentation are talking about trauma-informed care, positive behavior interventions and supports, the speak up events, all of these things, the mental health. In fact, I'm not even sure a few years ago we did have all of these things included in the safety and security presentation. And I think they're clearly safety and security. And in fact, in a way, you could say they're safety and security done the right way in that we want to preempt as much as possible, right? And so I really appreciate that. And of course, all of the really hard work that I know you're all putting in. Just for my clarification, I think I understand this, but to solidify it and also for the public who may not be as familiar with these things, is it fair to say, so Lakeside is sort of providing services that are more, it's trauma-informed care, it's training that's more of a sort of a preemptive, proactive thing, whereas the CGRC services, that's mental health services, and I don't want to say they're reactive, but it's a bit more, I'm just trying to make sure I understand the differences between the services that these two, both groups that sound really wonderful. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the differences between them.
Certainly, no, and that's, I think you broke it down very well. So it's trauma-informed care or trauma-informed schools is more of a tier one basic. Every student gets that approach and gets that development from their teachers and from their staff. Everyone accepts that. Everyone provides the same type of approach to all students and everyone in the school community. CGRC comes in, if you will, on the back end, almost a tier 3 approach. They work their way up that tiered system, just like in PBIS, through a referral process. So it's got to be worked up through the steps. We're noticing students might be falling out after receiving PBIS, after receiving exposure to trauma-informed care, after receiving good classroom management techniques. They might be moving up the chain where the tiered system, the triangle, if you remember the RTI old triangle, to get to the very top where that might be where CGRC is provided through a referral process, through really vetting through what's needed.
Thanks. I think that's really helpful just as we kind of hear these names tossed around and just sort of have a better understanding of what it is that they're providing. I just wanted to make two other comments, and one is that you talked about the threat assessment system, and this was coming from Dr. Cornell in Virginia after the Virginia Tech incident, and I have to make sure everyone knows that this is yet another example of something where, I read about it, and then I ask someone like Ed about it, and he's like, oh yeah, we're already doing that. And I just think it's every school, everyone's struggling. Every school district is struggling right now. There's a lot going on, but I just think given the size of our district, the size of our high school, what you all are doing is really impressive. The team-based approach, I think, is what I think provides me at least with some comfort that these decisions are being made by a group of people who are looking at from a variety of perspectives, and that what Dr. Cornell, I think, had said was one of the main faults was that things were going to one person, and this one person was deciding that's not a big deal, and that's just a recipe for disaster, right? So again, I mention it because it's something that gives me a little bit of comfort, and so I hope maybe it will give other parents maybe some comfort. And then the last thing I just wanted to comment on all the things that these considerations that are still up on the slide. I don't know if the public can still see the slide, but that last slide, the armed security and weapons detection and electronic hall pass, I know these are all very, very sensitive topics that bring up a lot of strong emotions and reactions, and very understandably so. I taught at a high school in North Philadelphia. We did not have metal detectors, but virtually every other school around us did. And I was very thankful that we didn't while we were there, because to me it felt, the idea of teaching in a school that had metal detectors, I hated the idea of feeling like I was teaching in, a security zone. That I really didn't like that idea. At the same time, it was a very small school, and it wasn't post-pandemic world, and there are just many, many differences between that scenario and now. And as Dr. McGarry has said, the weapons detection systems are not the same as metal detectors. You do also go through these things now. you go to a Phillies game, you go to the airport. I mean, they're ubiquitous. It's not just a security thing that you see, at a prison or something. I'm rambling a little bit. I think the point that I want to make is I want to sort of tell the public that this board takes very seriously both sides of that picture, that we don't want our students, we don't want our teachers or any other members of our staff to feel like they're working in a prison or they're working somewhere that, isn't safe for them to be. At the same time, we want them to feel safe. And Dr. McGarry talked about how important safety and security was to our staff, and especially as a consideration for staff leaving, unfortunately. But it's also a consideration for our students. And we want our staff to feel safe, and we want our students to not feel like they're entering a security zone. But we also want our students and our staff to feel safe. We want our students to feel safe. And so, again, I'm just saying this to say that I think we're all weighing all of these things very carefully, and I know that the administration is as well, and I hope that as these discussions move forward, people can try as much as possible to lower the temperature and have these conversations in good faith that we're all here working together trying to do the best things for all our kids. And as Dr. McGarry said, we may not get everything right, but we are going to keep trying, and we're doing our best.
I think it's just the sign of the times that we're in. There have been school shootings, and I have to say, this administration, we're preparing for the worst, hoping for the best. I mean, we have to be prepared for it to happen in our community, and if we're not, and we're caught off guard because we were not prepared, because we didn't have these tough conversations. I feel bad for us as a community, and it's a sign of the times where we aren't doing bomb drills for a nuclear attack. I mean, who knows? One day we could be looking into building bomb shelters again within our schools. So I think it's just a sign of the times, and I think the community needs to be aware of the reality of the world that we live in, and we have to do everything we can to protect our children while they're in our custody.
Sorry, just one go back, and it's kind of related to what Dr. Haig stated. I think it's clear that wherever we land as it relates to security, some people aren't going to be happy. I mean, we're not going to make everybody happy no matter what we decide. But the public needs to understand that some of us that sit on this board have children in this district, so there's nothing I wouldn't do to keep my daughter and all of our children safe. That's what keeps me up at night. I mean, I asked that at a safety forum, about what keeps me up at night, and that's it, safety of all of our children. So based on world events, I'm in a different place than I was 3 years ago, 4 years ago. I'm in a different place in my head and what I'm willing to do and accept for the safety of my child and our children. So I view it differently. I don't want them to feel like they're coming into, a hostile environment, or as you stated, a war zone. But if it's a little discomfort so that they feel safe, so that they feel protected and can focus on the reason why they're here, then, that may be okay with me. So I just need the public to know wherever we land, some will be vehemently unhappy with us, and some, and as David stated, as Director Neal stated, if something happens, then it'll be a long line of people here saying you guys weren't prepared. You dropped the ball. You didn't put everything in place. So there's no right or wrong answers. We're going to follow our conscience as we always do with every decision and make the best decision for all of our children. So.
We have a lot of children, and we don't have one to spare. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Any other comments from board members? Do we have any public comments tonight?
Good evening. My name is Joshua Sonore, 919 Morgan Avenue, Drexel Hill. This is just more of a, I believe, question, maybe / comment as well, related to the, I believe it's the CGRC. If I mess up that acronym, I apologize. So my question is, what is the intent of that particular, and it's a study, it's something, my son has gone through it, so I know I got the feedback from it, but I don't understand what the intent of that was. And the particular, I guess, comment part of this is, it pulled a group of children, and I believe it's pulling more out as this goes on, out of the learning environment. So if the school board or the school district is going to do something with that data, I'm all for it, but I don't know what that is being used for as a parent. So I just would like to know, that's all.
So I'm happy to answer your question. So what they're doing when they pull the students out, they're providing them with basically with strategies to then help them cope with if they're experiencing any type of trauma or nervous anxiety, whatever it might be as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay.
They're providing them with strategies and things that they can use to talk about if they're feeling a certain way, if they feel like they can't access any type of instruction, or if they feel like they're isolated, anything like that. And they're using that information to then provide back to the school teams that if there isn't a concern, then they'll be addressed with the parent and through the school support team. But we're not collecting data in terms of for a study or a research project at all. Like that.
Yeah, I think that was maybe my confusion, but, okay, so whatever comes of those, so they were group discussions is my understanding. So then is there a one-on-one component to that is kind of group?
So there could be.
Okay.
So again, through our referral process that we typically use in our district for any student who might need to go see the social worker or the counselor as a result of a mental health concern,
Yeah.
Or any type of concern for that matter, they would filter through the same referral process that student would without CGRC. And then the team who processes the referrals, which would be the social worker, the psychologist, the student support team, will then determine what professional is best suited to meet that student's needs. Could be CGRC, it could be the school-based social worker.
Okay. But all right, you've answered my question. It's being used for our kids internally?
Yes.
Very good. All right, thank you.
Yeah, just to follow up on that too, it could also lead to a referral to the student assistance program, which is anonymous, that is really driven by the parent and the student, that if there are needs and supports through Behavioral Holcomb Services, the SAP program would then be set up for you and your child to have an intake and a conversation, confidential. The school district doesn't get any information from that, but if there is a need or a parent is struggling with their child, there can be a referral to see a clinician and get supports and services that we don't have any access to. We just coordinate those meetings with you, and it's confidential with you and your child.
Very good. All right.
Right.
Thank
so
you.
in fact, one of the goals was through this process, we know the students who are struggling by when they are outwardly showing signs of struggling,
Yeah, okay.
but we don't catch the kids who might not be showing those signs. And that was the purpose of these groups, to see if we can find
Okay.
more students that might be hurting but not telling us.
Makes sense. Very good. No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Are there any other public comments this evening? Thank you. Are there any online public comments?
There are no online public comments.
Thank you. Can we have a review of the agenda this evening?
Yes, so tonight we had one item for as informational only, which was a safety and security update. There are no policies tonight, so this was it.
Turn this back over to President Brown.
Thank you, Director Williams. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation tonight. Very informative. A lot of good information was covered, so thank you for that. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Education and Pupil Services Committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.